Welcome, everyone. It is WebChat number 36. So we've done this 36 times, or will have in about an hour. And I'm excited. We've got Mary Krause with us. This is her first web chat of all those 36. It took me this long to get her signed up. So welcome. And as you can see, we're actually in the same place. So that's particularly fun that we get to host and present together. I'm visiting her community of Pioneer Valley in Amherst, Massachusetts. So I've been enjoying their hospitality. We had a nice common meal a little bit ago and been fun.
Yeah.
Having a good time.
Yeah.
So again, I'll say welcome to Mary Krause, and she's going to talk to us about work systems, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks. Okay.
Looks great.
Good. All right. So creating your co-housing work system. So when you're looking at creating your work systems, we'll just start with sort of conceptually, what are all the pieces you have to look at? And we'll start with general work and then meals work. So in terms of general work, there's sort of 4 kinds of decisions you need to make. One is, what work are you going to include as community work? Are you going to clean your own common house? Are you going to plow your own snow if you're in a community where that's an issue? What are you going to include? And some of that's also a function of where you live. What are the work expectations? So you're going to require people to be on a work team, to go to work days, etc. And then how do you connect people to the work? So you might say everybody's expected to, work 6 hours a month, but how do you make sure that happens? And then there's the question of enforcement. And then in terms of meals work, there's a decision about, do you include it in your general work system, or do you create a separate system for the meal system? Those are 2 different ways to organize your work. And then does every member have to participate in meals work, whether they eat or not? How many meals per week are you going to have? Which sort of circles back to that first question of what work to include as community work. So if you decide to have 7 meals a week, you're obviously going to have a lot more work hours than a community that decides to have 2 meals a week. So how many meals per week? How do you arrange your meal jobs? And what's your payment system, and how do you arrange that? So we're going to start with what work to include. And that breaks down to, so what's needed, right? If you're on a big rural site in the north, you're probably plowing snow and maybe you're mowing fields and who knows what. If you're a farm community, there's work there. If you're a small urban community in let's say a place where it doesn't snow, you're going to have probably fewer jobs that are needed. But then when you look at what all the jobs that are needed, what tasks are you going to take on versus hire out? So again, are you going to hire somebody to plow the snow, but you're going to snow blow the paths, whatever. And as you're deciding what tasks you're going to take on versus hire out, some of the considerations are what tasks are going to be community building, right? So some people say, oh, let's hire out cleaning the common house. And some people might feel like, well, it builds community to have a closer sense of your common house by cleaning it, or to work together. I mean, like meals. You might not want to hire meals out because it really builds community to cook together. And cost and time, right? So what does it cost to hire somebody? And if you don't hire anything out, that's cheaper, but then more people are, there's more person hours on the part of the community. And this is just a spreadsheet that is some kind of an estimate of how many hours are needed. And this can be customized to your community, and it's never totally accurate, but it's a starting point. So once you decide what work is going to be done by the community, what are your work expectations and how do you define that? So do you define that each person needs to work X hours per month? Or do you want to say that each person has to take on a certain number of tasks or set responsibilities? So you have to be on one committee and on one meals team and on 2 other kinds of tasks. So that's another way to set it up. Participation in work days is another thing that could be an expectation. So there's 4 work days a year and everybody's expected to work on 2 of them at least. And the participation in committees is something that some communities include in their work system and others don't. But that's an interesting discussion because that's sort of talk work versus physical work. And some people have a harder time doing physical work. So if you do include committee work, that gives them a chance to do, to be able to contribute more relative to the work that's counted, as it were. Which just, just to say, in terms of work that's counted, that's an interesting issue because there's always other kind of jobs and activities that maybe aren't officially part of a work system that happen in a community. So that can always bring up interesting conversations. So then how do you connect? So when you've decided what the obligation is, how do you connect people to those tasks? So the easiest way is just volunteer. Okay, we know we need 3 cooks for every meal and people are just gonna sign up or show up for a task. Sign up sheets are a way to make sure everything's covered. That could either be volunteer or not. And then a more organized way is having work teams. And work teams can break down into either a multitask or specific task team. So a multitask team would be you break the community up into groups of 10 adults and maybe kids, depending on the community. And then you rotate through tasks. So on week 1, it's, your team cooks, and on week 2, you clean the common house, and on week 3, you clean up after meals, and on week 4, you do outdoor tasks, and so on. And on the team, you figure out how to break it up. So maybe the people who love to cook are working really a lot in that first week, and the people who like to do outdoor tasks are working that other week. The fact that you're a smaller group means you can negotiate for each rotation. So if that somebody's really, really busy at work during that rotation, maybe they don't have to work as much. And then the next rotation, they work more. So it works well for accountability. A specific task team might be you're on a common house cleaning team, and your team of 3 or 4 people cleans the common house every second weekend of the month or something like that. Work days are another way. You set work days and people sign up for those or are required to show up to a certain number of those. And then there's a hybrid system, right? You might have some pieces that are done by teams, some pieces that are just distinct jobs that people volunteer to take on, and work days. So if you want to do multitask teams, there's a system for creating successful multitask teams, and you usually don't choose each other and say, well, I want to work with this person. You tend to set up random teams so you get a random mix of people. But what you don't want is to have all of the cooks on one team and all of the people who are really great at mowing lawns or can do heavy physical tasks on another team, or all the people who have plenty of free time to be on another team. You want to distribute those people. So what you do is you put your name on one side of an index card, you flip it over, and you create little stickers that represent certain key aspects that you want to be sure to distribute amongst all the teams. So, tomato is head cook. So, and then you put those cards upside down, you put all the ones that have head cook on them together, and you start out by distributing those by team, and so on. And then you flip over the cards and you see who's who. So then there's this issue of enforcement. And how do you make sure the work actually gets done? One is just a sense of commitment. But another way is to have some kind of coordination team with point people. So for instance, in my community, we have this thing we call the hub. And it's a team of, I think it's about 5 people. And every community member has a hub member that is associated with them. And so that person can check in with you. And so if they notice that one of their members is doing no work, they can go meet up with that person and have a friendly conversation about, why are you having a hard time working? And, what kind of jobs would work for you and your lifestyle, and how can we plug you in? Some communities have a pay or play system where if you don't work, you pay. And I'll show some detail of a couple of those systems later. That's actually, this graphic is from one of those systems. So if you don't work all your hours, you pay $15 an hour in this case for the work you didn't do. And then there's the laissez-faire approach. It's just sort of, okay, whatever, some people will work, some people won't, we're not going to worry about it. And, there's everything in between, obviously. Okay, so that's sort of the overarching piece on work. And then meal systems. Obviously, meals work is one of the main things in co-housing, because you're having, hopefully you're having 2 or 3 meals every week, or at least a number of regular meals. And so how do you relate that to the overall system? So do you include it in the general work system, or do you create a separate system for the meal system? And then does every member have to participate in meals work? So can people do other work in the community instead of, so let's say somebody doesn't eat much in the common house or at all, do they still have to work on meals or not? Can they opt out of the meal system or not? Or can they just do other work in the community? So let's say you have a commitment of 6 hours a month, and maybe people who don't work in who don't eat meals in the common house still have to work 6 hours a month, but they don't necessarily have to work on meals. They could work on something else. Or even people who do eat meals but would prefer to mow a lawn or clean the common house. The thing about opting out of the meals system, in my opinion, the downside of that is you don't want to encourage people to opt out. And so if they have the option of opting out, somebody who's really busy and maybe doesn't eat much in the common house is going to decide to opt out, and then they'll lose out on that connection with other people on the few times they would have gone to eat in the common house. So that's just my personal opinion on it. We can have a longer conversation. There's the decision of meals frequency and type of meals. How many meals do you want to have per week? What days? What times of day? What types of meals? So do you want dinners? Do you want brunches? Do you want to have them at times that working adults are likely to show up, or at times that young children are likely to, be good for young children? Do you want to have some of each? So those are all decisions you have to make as a group. And then general meals versus dinner clubs. So you can have meals that are organized where anybody can show up to the meal, and you do community work and so on. Or you can have a dinner club where it's okay, you sign up for that club, you sign up for the Monday dinner club, and then it has its own organization and participation. Any of these things I can elaborate more if you have questions. So the meal tasks, you have to organize the meal tasks. So there's certain set roles. There's, usually a head cook, someone who coordinates it, a shopper, a helper, there are helper cooks, setup people, and cleanup people. So your cooking and cleaning teams could be separate, or they could be combined. Some communities like to combine them so that if you have separate teams, the cooking team makes a big mess and the cleanup team has to clean it up. If you're the same team, you might be a little more responsible about all the dishes you use. But the flip side is some people like to cook, some people like to clean. So if you're a multitask team, you can organize it however you wish, and you could do it differently every month. So this is just, I think I might go into this example more in detail later, so I'll just keep going. Then there's meals payment system. So you have to figure out your sign-up system. Some groups have computerized, it's an online sign-up. This is, you have a sheet in the common house where you sign up by hand. Different ways of signing up for the meals, posting the menu, signing up for the meals, setting the parameters of how soon you have to sign up before the meal. And then you have to set up some kind of billing system. So with your cost allocation could be per meal, or it could be a monthly price for participation, depending on the community. Or in some meal clubs, you pay for the meal you cook and then you eat for the rotation. So the pages I'm shown here are from Pioneer Valley Cohousing, where I live. And it's a sign up with several menus. And then on the bottom right, you see the sheet where you pay. And what you do is you highlight your check your check number and the amount that you paid, and every box is worth an adult meal. And then the cook X's off for an adult meal and does half an X for a kid's meal. One of many systems. Some communities you're billed by the amount, and we have a budget, so it's $4 per meal. But other communities, the meal cost varies depending on what the cook's cooking. So plan your system as you think you're going to like it, and then revise it over time. So set up a system, or if you're an existing community, revise a system that fits your community, and then evaluate it every year or two, and keep revising it and refining it over time. And, you know, it'll unfold organically. Your needs might change over time, and just remain open to changes. Part of it is seeing what works by trying. So I'm just going to go through some examples from some communities. So Jean, you can chime in. Should we take Jean off? Do you want to take yourself off? And
okay, yes, I do recognize that path.
Yeah. So 32 households on about 5 acres. You all moved in 2007. And you have a sign-up work system with specified expectations and a separate meal system.
Right.
So far, so good? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
So here's the general work system. There's a sign-up system with jobs that change every 6 months. There's a chores list posted by the cleaning committee and the land committee. And this is, I think, a really great and interesting thing in your community, there's a participation agreement for both owners and renters, and it specifies 1 job per month minimum, and people sign it. Do you want to say more about that, Jean? Or
yes, when you move in or you purchase a unit here or become a renter, then you do sign a participation agreement, and that includes a work, a chore to do, and a meal. Once a month you help with a meal, and then you join a committee. We have 6 committees, so you decide which committee you want to be on, and you know, a meal and a chore.
Great, thank you. And so you're expected to serve on 1 committee, and you're expected to participate in decision-making process and be on the board of directors. So is everybody on the board of directors, or do you rotate?
Yes, the board of directors includes all owners. And then we have an executive committee that, you know, is really, you know, sets up our monthly meeting.
Right.
Right.
Great. All right. So it sounds like everything's still fairly up to date.
Yes, it's going well. We started out with 16 committees and we've reduced it to 6.
Nice, nice. So here's your participation agreement.
Oh, wow. You have it, yes. Okay.
Yeah, you sent that to me. And I just love, I mean, you were, you know, I think talking to me about when we talked ages ago about, you know, the advantage of that. And I think this is really smart, I think, because people literally read this agreement and sign it. You know, it's not just, oh, we made this agreement as a community.
Mm-hmm.
You're literally signing your name to that agreement. I think that just helps make people conscious. Is that yours?
Yes, yeah. It's an agreement when you buy in.
Yeah. So the meal system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mandatory participation in the work, that is, right? I mean, you're not forced to eat.
Right. You don't have to eat any, you know, the meals, but we do ask you to help prepare a meal.
And I think you said there were a few exceptions where there's some extreme examples, like someone with an extreme dietary requirement or extreme work schedule or something. Is that?
Right. And then we're an aging community, so a couple of older people don't participate as much. Yeah.
And it's 1 job a month, like you were saying.
Right.
There's meals every even day. Are you still doing that? So the 2nd, 4th, 5th, 22nd?
As long as it's a Monday through Friday, we don't offer it on the weekends.
Okay. So, right.
I think we could change. It
still
would help the people who are working Monday through Friday to participate more easily if we had an option on a Saturday or Sunday. Right.
Yeah, okay. So Monday to Friday meals by the cook teams, and the weekend meals are potlucks.
Right. If there is one, I don't know.
Okay, so is that sort of not necessarily happening? So you have one lead cook. Oh, sorry. Did you want to?
Right, that's right.
One lead cook, two
Yeah.
assistant cooks,
Right.
and one cleanup person. One cleanup
I
person.
think we need 2 cleanup people.
We have 3.
See?
And I think that may not be atypical. But you get about 24 people per meal because you have a lot of, I mean, the thing is too, you have a lot of meals, right? So it's not,
Right.
yeah.
Of course, lately we've been having a lot go on in the community outside of co-housing that's been drawing people away, and sometimes we've had to cancel a meal once or twice a month, unfortunately. Yeah. But
You still finding you have about 24 people per meal? Does that sound?
yeah, this might be a little high now, but
Okay.
yeah, you know, at least 15, you know, sometimes 30, depending on who the cook is.
Yeah, I know, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And if they get their menu out early enough, then
Right.
that attracts people. If they say, well, I'm going to prepare this. Oh, that sounds good.
And buffet style, right? Is that still?
Yes. Right. But yes, yeah, you can take what you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Good. Thanks. That's fun
Okay.
to have you in person on the call and to.
That was a nice surprise.
All right. WindSong Cohousing.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So that's
I'll mute me.
British Columbia, Vancouver area. So Langley, British Columbia, there's 34 households under one covered street. They moved in around 1996. Their work system was volunteer, and now they have a pay or play system, which I'll go into in a little more detail. And their meal system is partly included in the main work system and partly separate. So here's their pay or play system. They have what they call their Community Contribution Service, or CCS. The guideline is 3 hours per month, and they track it using a quarterly online worksheet. All adults have deposited $90 into the CCS system, and they pay $10 an hour. I thought it was 15 on the form, but anyway, if they haven't met the guideline. So if you haven't, you know, well, pay or play. Now, my understanding, here's their form, and if I'm remembering this wrong, there's nobody. I wish there was a member from each community on the call, you know, to bring me up to date. But what I remember, and even if I'm wrong, it doesn't matter because the principles apply theoretically. I think what they said is you had to report in order, and then you had to pay, right? So if you know, this report says, I don't know if you can see it. Oh, I think I have a close up. Yeah. So there you see where you write down your name and the job that was done and the total hours in the 3-month period, which is supposed to be 90. And if you've done 9 hours, your CCS payment is $0. And if you've done only 8 hours, you owe $15 for that 1 hour of work you didn't do, and on and on. Well, and then you say what you owe, right? So you're supposed to pay. The onus is on the non-worker to say I didn't work and to cut the check. And so I think what somebody told me, and again, the theory stands even if it's not true for this community, is that the same people who weren't working were also not filling out their participation agreement. So, you know, what are you going to do then? Hound people to fill it out and get the check from them? You know, you're still in the position of trying to ask somebody to work or ask somebody to pay. And there's a summary sheet of who did what jobs. So they take that input and it all gets put out on a sheet with people's questions and so on. And they also, so they have this thing called the gaps list where they list, I guess, additional jobs over and above their basic jobs. And you can email to them, and so then people fill those gaps. So their meal system, so I told you there's 2 parts to it, right? So one is the supper clubs, which is separate from the main work system. And they have 2 supper clubs every Wednesday and Thursday. Each adult in the club cooks once per rotation, and there's no payments, and the cook pays for the ingredients. So you just, you know, the way I look at a supper club like this, if you have missed a few of them and you feel like, oh, I didn't really get much out of it, or I'm really broke this month, or this rotation, maybe you make rice and beans. And if you're feeling really flush, whatever, you can make lobster. But then you just, no accounting. The nice thing is there's no accounting. You just show up and cook, and then you show up to the other meals. And then the other part of their system is community meals, which is part of the main work system. They don't have a regular schedule, and they have approximately 3 of them a month. An email notification is sent out, and there's a sign-up form in the binder to sign up for these meals. But that's part of their, so if you cook a meal, that's credited towards your community work hours. So Catoctin Creek Village is in Taylorstown, Virginia. They planned 18 households. At the time they talked to me about 8 years ago, they had 9 complete. I'm not even sure if they've moved ahead, but again, the theory of what they did is really interesting. So 160-acre rural site, and they have a pay or play system and a separate meal system. So what was interesting to me was their pay or play system, which I thought was particularly clever. So they set up a work share system, which had been in place for 4 years at the time, 8 years ago. That involved a minimum of 8 hours per month per household, or 4 hours for a single adult household. You can buy out of the work at $10 an hour, and your monthly dues include your $80 buyout. You report your work at the end of the quarter to receive a reimbursement. So the clever thing about this is the onus is on you to get reimbursed. So nobody's going to chase you down to say you need to get reimbursed. Well, they might, but it doesn't create that tense situation of trying to chase somebody down to do work or chase somebody down to pay. Everybody's already paid, and when you've done your work, you get your money back. So I thought that was really a clever system. So they have work days once a month, morning work followed by a potluck and debriefing, and that was one way to fill the work requirement, which I think a lot of people took on. And their meal system was separate from the main work, and it was just a party system, which is someone decides to cook and lets people know the menu, and diners can bring a side dish or wine if they feel like it, and there's no accounting. So it's pretty informal. Okay, Sunward Cohousing. I don't actually know how we're doing for time. Are we good?
You're good.
Okay. Ann Arbor, Michigan, 40 households. They moved in around 1998, and they have an assignment system based on a survey of job preferences. And committee work is included, and the meal system is separate. At the time I talked to them, they were developing a new system for the meal system. But the work assignment system I thought was interesting. So the general principles, the overarching goal was for people to be happy in their work. And they have 6-month work cycles with jobs assigned based on preferences. Now, how they do that mechanically is that members complete a survey of their job preferences, and then there are reports generated by job and by name, so just 2 separate spreadsheets or tables. And then a small team reviews the reports and assigns jobs. So, so they look at what everybody's preferences are on the table, and they make an assignment. So they start with the jobs report, which, so the report that lists it by job, not by person. And they use that to fill the hardest slots, so if nobody likes to clean the bathrooms, they'll start with that job, and the one person who said that was, high on their list, they'll choose them. Then they use the member report. So the really hard to fill jobs, they fill that way. And then they go to the member report, and they use that to fill the remaining slots. Now, the really clever thing is they do a different order of names each cycle. So I think they divided the list of names, alphabetically divided into 3. So they start at the beginning of the alphabet on the one cycle, then 6 months later they go through a cycle again. They start 1/3 of the way through the alphabet, and then 2/3 of the way through the alphabet, and then they start over. So you're never in the position of, oh, I'm always the last person on the list who doesn't get my favorite job. And then the last few people on the list are called to negotiate jobs, because when you get to the end, I mean, you probably don't have people left that really have their highest preference job available, so you kind of negotiate. So here's their list by job. So you see the jobs at the top, and then the names on the left. And so the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shows their level of preference, so you can pick that out. And then here's the one that's by person at the top of the list. And I guess, oh, there's a place where people can put in comments like, I can't do this kind of work physically, or so on. Songaia Cohousing in Bothell, Washington has 13 households on about 10 acres. I think they have more households now, actually. They moved in around 2000. They have a hybrid work system, and their meal system is separate and very interesting. I think every community has a particular thing that's fascinating about them, I think. So their general work system, so committees work as well as meet. Each member is expected to be on one committee. At an annual meeting, members sign up for committees at their annual meeting. So that's committees. Then there's common house cleaning. Tasks are by assignment on a quarterly basis. Each member notes their top 3 preferred jobs, and there are more people than jobs, so some people get a sabbatical. And then there's work days. So you see how this is a hybrid. Then there's work days. People are expected to participate in work days. They've got about 4 of them a year. And then mowing is done by volunteers. So, and I think hybrid systems, I mean, this is very hybrid, but I think hybrid systems in communities, some degree of hybrid system is not atypical. So these are their affinity teams and committees. So the general work system, so how was it working last time I talked to someone there? Work was getting done. All members were not participating in committees. Common house cleaning was getting done, but sometimes a volunteer will cover some work that wasn't done. And surprise, surprise, there's different standards of cleanliness. I'm sure that's not true in any other community.
I've never heard that.
I've never heard of that either.
No.
I'm sure none of you have either. So their meal system, I think, is pretty cool. So it's separate from the main system. It's voluntary participation, and you have 2 options. So the first option is a full-time meal program, which involves 4 dinners and Saturday breakfast, a common pantry available for home use. You need to cook or clean once a week, and it costs, sorry, this was 8 years ago, but still it was amazing back then, approximately $120 per month per adult. Actually, I think I asked somebody at Songaia at the conference, and I think it might still be 120 or less. I forget. Anyway,
they
very
grow
cheap.
A lot of their own food too there.
That would do it.
So that's part of it.
Yeah, but he told me that there's a couple of people who just really know how to shop frugally and where to get good deals in bulk at different places, and they have more than 75% participation. Then the second option is pantry only, where you have access to the common pantry for home use, and you take on a job that helps the food program. But I just love it that somebody figured out how to do this really affordably, and the pantry's included, and they have 5 meals a week. I think that's great. So here's their meal jobs. They've got a cook team and a clean team. So they have a lead cook, they call it second banana, and third papaya, which is, I think, a kid helping optionally. And then they have set up and clean up, and a second cleanup person, and then a kitchen mop person. So it's a total of 3 people for the cleanup. So yeah, there's so lead cook, second cook, optional kid slot, team for 2 to set up and clean up, weekly mopping, recycling, and cleaning. And then shopping, the cooks submit the menus list. So this is interesting, and I'm going to have to move this over here so I can actually see my own slide. There we go. Cooks submit a menu list each week, and the shoppers shop for all of the meals and the pantry. And they use local in-season menus to keep the price down. I mean, that's obviously a really good way to go. Okay. There we go. Yeah, so here's the up-close job description. We can go back to this if you want more of the details, and the cleanup team. So it's all spelled out in detail. And their meal sign up is by, putting in your sticker, magnet, whatever it is. So that's the way you connect yourself to the job. So again, just to summarize before we go into the questions, general work. So, what your considerations are: what work to include, what are your expectations, what's your system for signing up, and do you enforce it? And then for meals work, do you include it in the general system or separate? Does everybody have to participate in meals work? How many meals a week? How do you arrange your meal jobs, and what's your payment system? The one more thing I just want to say, because it occurs to me, I may not have been totally gone into enough detail about the Affinity. I talked about multitask teams. So Affinity teams, the idea is the reason it's called Affinity teams is you're doing what you like. So if you love to cook, you sign up to be on the cook team for every second Wednesday of the month. Or, if you love to clean, you sign up for common house cleaning. If you love to mow grass, you sign up for that team. So you're working with other people who enjoy that task on the task. So instead of having to rotate through tasks, some of which you might not like, you're working really hard at something that you like. Okay, I think that's, oh, right. So yeah, is all this work daunting? Right, so it's what built the community. It's what keeps us going. So anyway, rather than now get to work, now let's get to questions.
Now let's get to
discussions.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a few already in the chat, so
Great.
we'll start with those. Okay. Hold on. I'm gonna go catch the first one first. So how do you deal with folks that rebel against having work accountability?
As in individual members who don't want to be accountable, don't want to work?
I think that's the question.
Yeah. I mean, rebel against it is that's an interesting, because there's two parts to that question, right? So there's the rebel and there's the not getting work done. Because I think in most communities, there are some people who don't work, and it might be the same people for years and it might not. It might be a certain set of people for a couple of years, and then they start finding a way to plug in, and then it becomes some other people because they get really busy or their health goes down the tubes, or they have more children, they suddenly have children, or their job changes. So it's interesting because I think there could be a lot of resentment around people who don't work or don't work enough. And I think it's important to try to get people to plug in as much as possible. I think there's also a place for letting go and knowing that those people are actually missing out. And that for most communities, the work will get done. So I think you want to encourage, you want to support. I mean, I like the hub system that we have in my community where there's an individual person assigned, to each adult so they can go to them and have a conversation. And, it can be something like if somebody's, let's say, working all day long and they're extremely busy and they're just not figuring out how to plug in, and the hub person goes to them and they say, I don't know, I'm not here all day, and then they might say, well, we need somebody to lock the common house late at night and then open it up first thing in the morning. Can you do that? And they might say, yeah. But you also just might get people who don't work. So that's one part of the question. But then the rebelling thing, the attitude, rebelling against accountability. I mean, that sounds like a good topic for a feelings meeting, an emotional content kind of a meeting where, with a skilled facilitator, whether it's somebody in your group or someone from outside, where you really get down to, okay, what's going on, what's behind that attitude. I mean, it's kind of funny. There was one group I was working with around creating their work system, and there was one guy who said, and he's a hard worker, okay, but they were talking about making work days mandatory. And he said, if you make it mandatory, I'm not going to want to do it. Just because you tell me I have to work, I won't want to. I want to do it out of the goodness of my heart. So, if someone's grating against it for that reason, and yet I know he's a hard worker and he cares and he does a lot for his community. I mean, but he was very honest in verbalizing it too, which was helpful. That's one thing versus, I don't know, someone who really doesn't want to work and maybe that's some deeper personal issue. I don't know. But having a meeting where you can all hear each other and talk about it. And, I think hearing why people aren't working I find that really helpful. Somebody who says, even like actually in our community, we had years ago, a meeting around work. And I said something like, I just want to hear from people who aren't working. Like, I want to know why they're not working. And, one of my friends came up to me later and kind of explained to me why. And I was like, okay, great. I get it. That's fine. And another person didn't come up to me later, but like was talking about some other thing. And it just became clear to me that let me, just let go of it. Anyway, kind of a long answer, but there's a lot to that. It's a big, that is one of the, definitely biggest issues. But I mean, and I mean it that people are missing out. I remember eons ago in the early years of our community, there was a day when I was just, I was really doing a lot of community work that day. And it was a lot of visible community work. And I was really enjoying it. I was, gardening and cooking and, cleaning out the compost bin, the recycling bins. And somebody, came up to me and made like this really comment of like, oh, aren't you, thank you. Aren't you this great community worker or whatever? And I realized, wait a minute, I'm having a good time and I'm getting the recognition. It's like, so if I wasn't doing it, I'd be missing out. Anyway. Yeah. So whoever's question that was, I hope I answered it. Was that Julia? Was that yours, or are you asking another?
It was Mikos.
So
hi.
So we have another question also for Mikos in the chat. The work buyout rates seem low at $10 an hour, especially if participation is so low that outside contractors or handy persons have to be hired to make up for that lack of participation at $35 to $65 an hour, which can have an impact on dues or deferring maintenance. Any comment?
Yeah. I think, okay, that's probably part of my show that I should update. I think I've heard communities more recently say $20 an hour. And one thing you can do is hire a teenager. It depends what the work is, right? Or hire, so if there's maybe a teenager in the community who needs some work, of course you might say they should just be working as part of the work system too. So, or I suppose you could hire somebody to do extra hours, but it does get a little, start paying community members, that does get a little, I don't know, are they just going to do their paid work then instead of doing more extra hours? But maybe that's okay. But each community has to figure it out. And I don't think, the interesting thing with pay or play, personally, I don't feel like it should be encouraged. I feel like it should be a fallback. Like if somebody really isn't able to work, this is my opinion. This is not what everybody thinks, but I think there's that work really helps people connect in community. But so hopefully there won't be too many people doing that. And I know in our community, we have like people are allowed, we don't really have an official pay or play, but I know there's some people I know who, it may just be one household, I don't know, who have decided to pay. They want to pay because they're not able to do the community work. And I think they feel relief. But I don't think you want to hire a lot of, and you could create higher rates. You do need to look at it as a community. What are the things that are going to be hired out?
And can I chime in?
Yeah.
So I think some of this is that depending on the community, like I can't remember the name of it, but there's a senior community that hired a cook.
Right.
Yeah. So they don't make their own meals ever. They have meals every night. They're great meals because they, amongst themselves, decided that they had more capacity to pay for a cook than to do the work. Yeah. And that seems to be working very well for that community. So it's very unique to each community what is going to be community building.
Yep.
And, they eat together more often than most co-housing communities because they hire the cook, and, so that works for them. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the culture.
Yep.
Like setting up the culture of we like to be together and we like to be together when we're working together. And we like to, that kind of culture, as opposed to, I know there are communities where work is just work. And so there's a very negative connotation to it, which is where you're more apt to get the resentments.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you're talking about.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I love what you're point about, depending on the community, I mean, about the community, because every community has its own
Mm-hmm.
character, its own principles, its own, its own situation, what work they needs to get done versus hired out, what people's capability is for doing highly physical work, and how they connect. I mean, some communities might connect by playing a lot of music together, and so maybe they'd rather hire somebody to clean their common house so they have more time to, sit down and play music together. Yeah.
Julia, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Actually, a couple of them. How do people come up with all the possible jobs or tasks? Because we're still building, we haven't moved in yet, and I'm trying to come up with at least a baseline of possible things that will be jobs or tasks. And I admit going through your slide presentation from the conference and pulling, oh, that looks like something, and that looks like something, and trying to put it together. But I mean, it just seems like an enormous task that I'm trying to do. I don't know if there's any pointers you can give me.
Well, I mean, I do have a spreadsheet that, wouldn't be representative of your community. I have sort of a generic, I think it's a generic, spreadsheet of these are the kind of community jobs, which I may have put together for a specific community. I think we put together one for our community. I think I might have changed it for a community I was working with. So if you email me, I'd be glad to
I will.
do that. And then, that can at least be a starting point, because you could be like, oh, well, we're not going to be plowing snow, whatever, but at least it'll be on there. And I'm probably missing some things, but it'd be a good starting point.
I can also post it with the slides
Oh, great.
on the past WebChats page of the website.
Cool.
Okay. And the second question has to do with kind of what Nikos was asking you. I had just started our discussion on community meals, and I had two people flatly say, I'm going to come eat when I want to eat. I'm not going to do anything to help. I'm not going to cook, clean, prepare, anything. I'll pay double whatever the meal costs because I just want you to cook for me. And I'm like, okay, nice to know that that's your attitude. And the same person who says, and when it comes to do any other work, you tell me how much it'll cost and I'll just give you the money because I don't want to do anything.
Okay,
They just want to sit on their porch and be a social person, and that's it. It's kind of discouraging.
So that sounds like a longer community conversation on a real emotional level. I mean, if that person is in fact saying it the way you're saying it, that sounds pretty unilateral. That may or may not be the way they said it.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
So that doesn't really fly in co-housing when you're trying to make decisions together, in my opinion.
No.
But it sounds like that would be it'd be really good to have an honest conversation, around what are their needs, what are the community decisions, how does that all work together? Because you can't just make up your own rules in a community. I mean, I can't just show up at my dinner and decide, I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
You can't just do that. So
They just figure because they're stating it now before anything's put in place, then that gives them absolution from everything. So
no, but what it does do is, if that can be translated into what I'd really like to do is be very social and not participate in meals work and not participate in this and that and pay more money, then having a meeting where you get back to, okay, so what are this person's needs? What are other people's needs in the community? There might be some creative solutions. It might end out that they don't cook me, and maybe people will be okay with them paying double. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe
I told her you can fold the napkins for dinner.
Sorry?
I told her you can at least come fold the napkins for dinner.
Right, exactly.
Fold them and put them in the basket. That's something you can do. No, I don't even think I want to do that. So I'm just challenged.
No, I think that's definitely a topic for some community facilitation. And again, I mean, if they want to be very social, there could be a work system. And if you haven't designed your work system yet, what's that?
I haven't. That's why I'm here, just to get a refresher.
If you do a meal system where you don't necessarily have to do, a work system where you don't necessarily have to do meals work, but you have to do some kind of work, there might be some very social, organized work that they would participate in, and they wouldn't have to cook, and it would be fine in the whole picture.
I told her she can plan birthday parties. Oh, I don't like to be responsible for details like that. Okay.
just chime in and say is that everything Mary said, have the conversations, all of that, possibly get some outside help having those conversations, all those things I completely agree with. And at the end of the day, it is sometimes the case that it is better for the community to just let that person do what they do than it is to try to convince them to do something different.
Yeah.
Right? The
That's
cost of
pretty
them
much-
not doing the work may very well be less than the cost of whatever effort goes into trying to make them do something they don't want to do.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
easier. Instead of her making her cranky, just go, okay.
I mean,
I
it
just-
it kind of falls back into what I was
Right.
saying earlier about most communities have one or two or a few people who aren't doing their work. And yeah, if you could just come to peace with it and realize that the whole community is not going to fall apart. I mean, if you have half the community, doing that, that's a problem. But it's one or
Oh,
two.
cross
people.
my fingers. Just a couple, please. Just a couple. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
also, if I'm remembering right, you're not moved in yet. So
No.
once people move in, co-housing changes people. I think for the better.
I hope.
Shift.
You know,
I mean,
it would seem to me that if if your community hasn't, you're still on the talking stage or the purchasing stage. I don't know where you are.
Building.
The building stage, and if this person is not willing to participate to the degree that you indicate, perhaps co-housing really isn't for them, and that may need to be an earnest discussion.
Yeah. No, I understand your point, but that's not allowed.
right.
So we'll see. We'll just see. I'm just going to remain optimistic, but I thought any tips you could give me, it sounds like I followed pretty much what you're telling me. Can't do much more than that. And just, I'm going to be in acceptance and say, okay, go sit on
There's
your
a good
porch.
bit of that in co-housing.
Yeah.
Acceptance.
Yeah.
It's good
Yeah,
practice.
a lot of, okay.
Well, we are nearing the end. Do you have any summary statement you want to make?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
All right.
This is another question.
So we will post those documents. Again, I am traveling this week, so probably it'll take me a few extra days to get everything posted, but by a week or so from now, you should be able to find everything on the past web chats page of the website. That is the cohousing.org website. That's also the place where you can make donations in support of this program and the rest of the programming of the association. As you know, we don't charge to attend the web chats, but we absolutely, there are costs to making them happen. And so we appreciate any support you can give us. We also would encourage you to sort of use your networks to encourage people to attend or even to look at the past ones. There are now 35, will be 36 posted. So there's a good bit of opportunity to learn about co-housing. And we'd love to have people utilizing that. And what we think is that there are a lot of people living in co-housing who probably would have the capacity to learn about things that are interesting to them or relevant to them in co-housing through this medium, but just aren't hearing about it. So please feel free to send announcements to your community lists and your Facebook groups and places that you have to just encourage folks to both go to the website in general. We think there's a lot of good information there, and also specifically to the past web chats page of the website where they can just scroll through and see the various topics. And, it's an easy thing to turn on while you're making dinner or, anything like that. You're folding laundry, whatever you're doing, you can just sort of watch it in the background. And then, if you get interested and want to look at the slides, those are always shared there too. So just encouraging folks to learn as much as they can about co-housing, we think makes a big difference. So again, I'm Karen Gimning. I'm the Associate Director of the Cohousing Association of the United States. Karen Hoskin had family commitments. She's our Executive Director and wasn't able to be here tonight. And thanks to everybody, and particularly thanks to Mary, and for hosting. It was so fun to be here with you.
I know. Thank you.
This was great.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Very much.
Thanks for the refresher.
Very
Thank you.
enjoying.
Thank you.
Everybody,
Good
good
to see
night.
you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.